Hi, welcome again to season 2, episode 2 of the Modern Sense podcast. Today on the podcast, I am thrilled to be joined by Adam Chapman. He is a certified financial planner who is passionate about helping retirees live more, give more, and intentionally die with less. He is the founder of Yes Money, a financial planning firm founded on the core principles of spending versus saving. Adam is here today to talk to me about an age-old retirement planning income vehicle, the annuity. Welcome, Adam.
Thanks, Andrea. So happy to be here. And thanks, Jennifer, for making the introduction.
Yeah, and I should say I'm also joined by a co-host today for the first time ever, Jennifer Hughes. She's a Modern Sense financial planner. She's got an actuarial and pension background, which will no doubt add a lot of color to our conversation. So thanks for joining us, Jennifer, in this conversation today.
Well, yeah, thanks for letting me piggyback in. As I said, I just didn't want to miss out on the fun of talking about annuities. They're a great product, and as pension nerds, think they're really exciting.
We might be the only three people who think this is interesting, but let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And just I've been in the annuity world for a really long time because my career started out on the insurance side. And annuities is at its core, an insurance product. So I'm really excited to bring this topic back to the forefront to kind of reflect on the evolution of annuities over time. And so, Adam, I want to start with let's go back to the basics. 101. Let's just talk about annuities. What are they? When did they originate? And for those who don't or aren't very familiar with what an annuity is or don't know what they are, let's just demystify that right now for everyone.
Yeah. First and foremost, I would say annuities are a risk product. Like you said, started with insurance companies. That's actually where my background originated as well. So annuities have been around in my career for the entirety of my career. But I believe when you actually do some research on like where the first annuity was originally created, it actually goes back to Roman times. It was part of Roman pension schemes in the way that they were originally created. So like we're talking thousands of years before retirement even existed, annuities existed. And I think if you look in retirement terms, they were much more aligned with sort of the original defined benefit pension. Before pension assets created their own way of creating those guarantees, they actually used to be farmed off to insurance companies to purchase annuities for the individual retirees, is I believe how a lot of the annuity systems actually originally began.
Oh, really interesting. I didn't actually know they went back to Roman times. Very fun fact. One
Mhm.
fun fact that I remember, and maybe you remember this too, Adam, is that there didn't used to be RIFs. There was only annuities. So when RSPs had to be converted at retirement, there wasn't a RIF. There was only the option to convert to an annuity. And so at its core, the annuity is, like you said, a defined benefit pension that's created from a pool of assets to provide a guaranteed income stream for the rest of someone's life. So that's, really simplistically what it's about. How do you view annuities for clients today? Let's just go right there. Like, when do you get into the annuity conversation with the client, and when do you think it's appropriate?
Yeah, well, I think they're becoming a much bigger and important part of the retirement income conversation, mostly because of what's changed in the marketplace, right? When you go back to the 50s, 60s, 70s, I think the data is something like almost 54% of people had defined benefit pensions. So one in every two workers had a defined benefit pension. If you're looking in the private sector now, I think that's down to like 5 or 8%. Like it's a very, very tiny number. So the problem is we're getting a lot of people who are retiring to a very different retirement than their parents or their grandparents had. So the baby boomers coming in now, some of them have defined benefit pensions or they have partial ones, but that is slowly going away. So annuities are becoming a much broader conversation just of how can we get you the same retirement that kind of existed for the generations of the past, where it was a little bit more guarantee in your retirement income, but also just less worry associated with it. So the dynamics of the conversation are changing just because of what the market has changed over decades of retirement. And I think that's what's really bringing annuities back to the forefront is people want that carefree lifestyle that the retirement commercials promised. And if you don't have a defined benefit pension, it's a little bit harder to achieve.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
that carefree element you mentioned is true because the management And especially in the DIY world, the self-management of assets through retirement does create some emotional stress and strain. I find that, at least for our clients. And that's something else that you have to continue to do versus the defined benefit pension or annuity approach, in which you really get to live a little bit more freely, as you say, with that guarantee in place.
Which is really
Yeah.
what that risk product, when we talk about it as a risk product, right? We're shifting the risk from us to the insurance company for that income stream, right? And I think people underestimate the importance of that, but it brings up its own challenges just on its own of, right, you have to move money that you have into an income stream that you can no longer control. And there's a whole lot of behavioral stuff we can talk about with annuities, but that is one of the biggest issues that people have. It's easier when it's a defined benefit pension, it's accumulated as it was, and you get this payment. When you actually have to go buy that payment yourself, people really want to dig into what annuities are, which is probably why we're here.
Exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. And I was going to say, you've hit it perfectly, Adam, and how my background fits in with you. So you both come from the insurance side. My side is coming from the DB pension side, where I was behind the scenes, where we're doing the valuation to make sure these DB people get their payments, and seeing that shift in the industry to the DC and how we can then support them, and then bringing annuities back to light for this new world that we're living in.
Yeah. And for those who don't know what DC is, because Jennifer is
Thanks.
whip smart and using all the industry acronyms, it stands for defined contribution pension plan. So that's what the industry is shifting towards, which really takes a lot of the risk off of the employer to provide a certain amount of benefit in the future, and really just providing a pool of assets that needs to be managed and invested. Um, and Adam, I like what you said about now it's a behavioral consideration,
Mhm.
where you're taking a pool of investment assets and you're having to go and make the choice to buy an annuity where you're relinquishing control. And I think that's where a lot of the challenge comes from, is that asset, it's a bit of an irrevocable decision to take that asset and buy a guaranteed pension for life if that wasn't necessarily your plan all along, like in the DB world. So talk to me about that a little bit more, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I think you were sort of highlighting just in sort of what you said, right? So we had originally the risk of a DB pension plan sat with the employer. The employers have now said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to shift it over to defined contribution plans, and the risk is now on the employee, right? Annuities are then bringing it back to shift the risk to the insurance company. It's kind of like we're passing the buck and moving it through, but we get caught in the middle when the risk is on us because we have to write that check. And one of the universal things about retirement, spending money, decumulation, whatever phrase you want to use to talk about that stage of living, is watching your assets go down, even when you intentionally make them go down, just brings negative emotions in, right? So just even the idea of saying, we're going to take this asset and we're going to move it over here, even though it still is an asset, it's not an asset we can see in the traditional sense, right? So, like I have to talk to a lot of clients about this. Sometimes they'll come in, great example, $2.5 million portfolio, absolutely no pensions, right? They've done a great job saving. They've got their defined contribution plans. They've got all these things. But then to say, hey, let's go buy an annuity, and the amount of annuity you want to need, we need to buy is going to cost $1 million. Let's just say we said that, right? How easy is it to write a check for $1 million? How many people have ever actually done that before? Right? And it's
Absolutely.
not the entirety of their portfolio. It could just be the work that we've done to say, this is the right amount of income you need, and this is how much we have to pay to get it, which is the correct approach. But that doesn't mean watching your portfolio go from that success point you achieved down to something substantially smaller, even for all the benefits we'll talk about over the next little while, doesn't make that any easier. Like, I think that is one of the core elements that make annuities difficult, even when you understand all the benefits from top to bottom, and it does make 100% sense for you. Writing that check is very difficult. And the funny thing is, they don't actually even write the check. It just gets transferred from one institution to another, right?
Yeah.
You're writing a physical check, but they're going to log in one day, check their investments, and realize that portion of money is just gone, right? And they can't log into a new system that now says, look, here it is. Instead, all they see is this monthly payment or annual payment or however they set it up. That's all they see instead. That's much harder for people to quantify. Is
Oh,
just the value of that payment from a not.
Yeah.
psychologically so difficult. And I've seen very few annuities in my day, probably for that reason. I can remember one client, this is a 2008 story, which I have to share because I feel like this is the state of the emotional side of the client that led to this decision, where the client had all of her money in non-registered assets. She actually had no registered assets. Don't know why. She actually wasn't my client. And in 2008 happened. And as we know, portfolios got decimated really quickly. She was about to retire. And she said, you know what? I don't want my retirement to be defined by a roller coaster like this again. I don't want the emotional ride. I don't want to feel the way that I'm feeling now. Now, she didn't actually lose a bunch of capital in the market. She was actually sitting in cash. But
Mm,
seeing what happened led her to the decision that she wanted to buy uh, a, an annuity with a 0 guarantee period, which we'll talk about what that is after in a minute, with all of her capital.
mhm,
Literally, she wanted to write that check, take the risk, and never have to worry about the stock market ever again, and never have
yeah,
that stress and that strain. So that's coming from a point in time when the emotional capacity to take on more risk was just at an all-time low. And I think
mhm,
we haven't really seen it hit that low since that point in time. But she wrote that check and she felt really good about it. Now, would I ever advise somebody put all of their assets into an annuity? Likely not. But this was a client-led decision with her advisor, and we were there to help facilitate it at the time. So I just wanted to share that because it was more emotionally driven than it
mhm.
was looking at giving up her asset pool. And I think that emotional reasoning can work one way or another when it comes to making the decision around whether an annuity makes sense for someone or not.
Yeah.
Well, we can
That's
we can definitely peel open that onion too about like which personality types or annuities best fitted for.
Yeah, Jennifer, did you have any of that in your actuarial training?
No, the actuaries don't hit much on the emotion, as you can imagine. What
Shocking.
I do have is seeing the letters going out to people, especially we're going to talk a bit about a pension windup or other pension option statements, and seeing people making these elections of, a great index pension that, could really support somebody nicely for their life, or they're seeing that big lump sum number on their pension election statement. Oh, I can take whatever, $1 million, and I'm going to get it in my RSP, and I would get to see the results. And I would always sort of play a game with myself when one of those went out as to whether or not the person was going to pick which side. Usually I was wrong.
Hmm, interesting. So, Adam, you sent me an article that we're going to discuss today, which is really interesting. It's called Unlocking the Annuity Puzzle. So, I'm going to link this in the show notes after if anyone's interested. But can you just describe for the audience quickly the synopsis of this article, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I think that the kind of gist is, and it's a question that a lot of people have been asking, is that there is a lot of behavioral benefits to using annuities in a retirement income plan. So that article is just questioning why aren't more retirees using annuities in their income plans and looking at some of the options that sort of fall into place as far as people understand it as to why annuities aren't more prevalent. And that's where I thought, as the conversation we have today, it's a great door to open and chat about why that actually is. Because I do have my own theories on this that are a little bit different than the article itself. I'm not saying there aren't great points in the article, but it's a great conversation. Like it is something that has been asked on both sides of the border multiple times. It is a pretty hot button topic right now. Why retirees aren't seeking out more guaranteed income sources.
So, from your theory and your perspectives, maybe your top two, why do you think that they are not more utilized today?
Yeah, well, let's deal with the most common one that we hear that we're going to sort of set aside and then talk about the other ones, because the most common one you're going to hear, especially in Canada, is that advisors are compensated to manage assets, but don't get compensated if they help their clients buy annuities, right? So it is far more beneficial for most advisors in Canada who get paid on the size of the assets to not help clients buy in annuities. They don't get paid on that. Even if they do, it's a bit of a commission. And it's nowhere near the amount they could earn if it stays invested. So that's conflict number one. But let's assume that wasn't the issue, right? We have a growing pocket of advice only advisors who do not have that conflict, right? But the predominance and the usage of annuities isn't necessarily increasing as we have more advice only planners coming into the scene. And I do think there's still a lot of advisors out there who will still do the right thing even though they're managing money for their clients. So let's just kind of say, let's assume that that's actually not an issue at all and dig into the other reasons that if you get beyond that one, there's actually other reasons. And I would say issue number one is annuities solve a problem that most people don't think they have. And this is the predominant issue, I would say, with annuities and how they're positioned in the marketplace and how advisors talk about them. Is we talk about on annuities as a longevity product. We say that this thing helps you if there's a risk of living a long time. But when you actually look at the data for what people perceive their life expectancy to be, there was a great LIMRA study that showed people in their 60s believe they will die much sooner than the actuarial tables actually say they will, right? So they believe that they're going to die way sooner than the data says, right? And then it isn't until they hit about their 70s and 80s where it actually starts to flip the other way, where they now start to believe they're going to live a lot longer than the data says they will. It inverts, right? It basically does that once people cross their own benchmark for their own life expectancy. So once they've beaten the odds they set for themselves, then they start to believe they're going to live a lot longer than they actually will. So this is the problem with annuities, is that when we talk about them as longevity products, we're appealing to a problem people don't think they have, right? This goes right down to that CPP. When do you take it, right? You can tell the camp they sit in, whether they believe in longevity or not, in their family, just by when they want to take CPP, right? Someone wants to take CPP at 60, and then you say, here's also this longevity product you should put in on top of your CPP, right? You're selling something they don't think they need, right? And so this is where the behavioral and the research data on annuities becomes so important. Is that I often say to clients that want to spend more in their earlier years because they are concerned about a shortened health span or lifespan, annuities are actually the thing that solve the risk of brevity. So not longevity, they help us solve the opposite even better. That when you look at the data, retirees with guaranteed income sources spend twice as much as those without. Spending twice as much money, you're doing twice as much. So for those who are really concerned about doing more in the earlier years, annuities are psychologically proven to actually help you do more in those earlier years, right? Which even changes the dynamics of how you think about CPP and when to start guaranteed income sources, right? It's like we tend to look at a lot of these things of what gets us more. More of what becomes the question. Is it more money we need, or do we need more confidence? Do we want more living? Do we want more life at the front end? Guaranteed income sources are actually the thing that provide that, because depending on how you structure it, like there's a big element here in how you layer retirement income together to make this happen. But that is the one benefit that guaranteed income can do that almost no other asset class can.
Yeah.
Can't claim to help people spend twice as much money.
Yeah, and I can see that. I feel like in what you're saying, and I'm thinking about this, you have a situation in which let's say you set up an annuity for someone who wants to have a higher spending in the beginning of retirement. That is psychologically impactful immediately. We don't have to wait. There's no delayed gratification on that. There's also no risk in that annuity element once you start to receive the income, right? So the only risk that you're perceiving is the additional income that you might be deriving from outside of annuities, let's say from your portfolio, and how much you need to take from that is now maybe cut in half because you've got the annuity income filling part of that bucket that wasn't there before, versus maybe someone who was DIYing with a full portfolio and having to manage the withdrawals and when do I take it? And that's a lot harder and the market is down and I don't want to, which makes spending a lot harder. Would that sort of be the reasoning behind why it's easier to spend more? That's just my guess.
Yeah, it actually comes down to just the consistency. One of the things that matters when you think about people who receive a paycheck, right? If you know exactly what that next paycheck is going to be, it's very easy to spend right up to that exact amount every month because you know the next one's going to show up exactly the same. And even though we can make a consistent withdrawal come from a portfolio, there's still that extra added question mark when the markets are going up and down is like, well, is that sustainable? Right?
Mm.
That's where the guarantee comes in is it's now consistent and it's sustainable. Those two elements have to work together to create that confidence to spend. And that's what makes annuities really great and guaranteed income sources in general, right? Because this is defined benefit pension plan, CPP, OAS. When those things are coming in, they're very easy for clients to spend because they know the next check's going to show up exactly as they expect and it will be there for the rest of their lives. Makes it really easy to spend that money. And that's what I understand the logic to be behind that extra confidence is its consistency paired with sustainability. Those two things have to work together.
Yeah, I love that. I haven't thought of it that way. That's great.
Hmm. Well, see, this is where the income structure matters, right? Is when you get into why it kind of works. Is the way that we do this is we line the guaranteed income sources up to the clients actually need spending in
Mhm.
retirement. So when we work through a cash flow exercise, we're looking at their needs, saying, okay, we have to make sure you can always put food on the table, roof over your head, transportation, getting around somehow, healthcare, pets often is another one that falls in. And then whatever kind of other expenses they say we have to be able to pay for the rest of our lives. We get some cases where that includes, a family cottage that needs to be passed down. Well, then they need to make sure that those expenses are paid for forever. So when you can go through and build that, look at what their actual needs expenses are, then you can align their guaranteed income sources to make sure that those needs are always paid for. So what we do and what I call the money left over is we go buy the annuities to secure that income that you can never live without with income you can never outlive. And then the money left over is what I call yes money. That's where the name of my company actually comes from. Is that leftover money is the stuff now you know you can spend with a little bit more freely. You don't have to think so hard about it because it's not going to put you in a position where you can't afford your home, especially if you use it, right? So it's a very fascinating shift in how you line up retirement income. But the fascinating element with the research on guaranteed income is when you do finally put the guaranteed income sources in place, how it changes people's risk profile on investing the rest of the money. And it actually shows, and we've seen this even in our client base, that their capacity to add more equities to their portfolio increases substantially, which actually decreases their risk of running out.
Mhm.
Right. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it just results in again, less worry, more carefree spending with the extra added benefit of adding more equities to your remaining portfolio. It doesn't feel as risky anymore
Hmm.
because it's just paying for the fun stuff. So you actually end up getting over the long term more fun stuff out of it and a lower risk of running out. Again, to sort of the point of we pitch annuities and position them as longevity products, but the evidence shows they're actually much better at solving the opposite risk of dying too young, right? If you can spend more freely in your earlier years without worrying so much about it, you get a lot more life out of those earlier years than you otherwise would.
One question, what you just said there, Adam, I love how you position that, and it's really interesting about the shift in the portfolio. Would you find though, if we consider the annuity portion that they've offset the risk there, was that previously in a fixed income or a lower risk piece? So overall, the actual portfolio stays the same. It's just what they're typically managing is where you're seeing the change. Or are you seeing the whole thing, including the previous annuity, also jump up?
Yeah, so it's Again, it depends on how we show it. Like we tend to, when we're actually showing asset allocation for clients, is we're including pensions now as part of their mix, right?
Okay.
And using that as their fixed income. And it's funny when you take people who already have defined benefit pensions, CPP and OAS, it's amazing to see what their actual equity exposure is when you include pensions in that calculation. In a lot of cases, it's much smaller than it really is than just by looking at their portfolio. So what we actually end up with is for the people who have the guaranteed income sources where it is sufficient to pay for those needs, we'll see multiple steps up in their equity exposure. And we actually, in our case, we actually don't use fixed income. It's just cash and equities for that remaining wedge, right? It's easier to manage. And I have found a simpler portfolio in a two fund system makes it really easy for retirees to know which piece is which and have the confidence. Like simplicity, I think is an underrated aspect of retirement income planning. But I think it goes to people sometimes believe that it's too simple to work, right? When you go really simple, right? We're solving a really complex a problem. And when you do it in a way that's almost too simple, it doesn't feel like it's capable of working. But when you use guaranteed income sources and a couple simple investment strategies on the remaining assets, retirement income doesn't have to be difficult to be effective.
No, I agree.
Love it.
I don't know if you remember this, Adam. There was a product a couple of years ago. This is probably 5 years ago or so that was designed by one of the fund companies, and it was meant specifically for retirement income. And it was a one-line product. This is the one thing you need to buy. And it was designed for advisors to provide to their clients, and it didn't work. And the reason is it was too simple for advisors to say, I'm adding value, because it was a one-line item. And there's a psychological impact, I think, to complexity that makes it feel like we're doing the right thing, where in reality, we're trying to simplify a retiree's life, not make it more complex. They've
Mhm.
already taken on a lot of complexity throughout their lifetimes. And you get to retirement, and we talk about simplicity in our meetings too, and they want to do this. They want to pare it down. They don't want to increase complexity. They want to reduce stress and reduce complexity. So I love that system that you're talking about. I think it makes a whole lot of sense. And I think as long as the client understands why, the why is the important thing. It's not the what products are we using. Talk to me about behaviorally, because you seem to be very successful with the strategy, which I love, and I think it's amazing. How do you help your clients get over that psychological impact of quote unquote writing the check to the
Mm.
insurance company?
Yeah. So this, I would say, starts earlier in the process that when we start working through a net worth statement, I talk to clients about the need to include visible and invisible assets. I classify pensions as an invisible asset, right? It's that thing that has a value, but we don't really necessarily know what it is. We just see it as an income stream. So when we start working with a client very early on, we include the commuted value of any pension they have, CPP and OAS. Get them used to seeing that those things are worth something, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I think when you start looking at the the number, the BMO study that says you need $1.8 million to retire, right? And people panic, right? They don't realize that their CPP and OAS takes care of a good chunk of that,
Mm-hmm.
right? Why are we understating our net worth by leaving out these potential assets? So I find it starts there. If we start actually including a value for those assets, it makes them easier for them to understand we've just moved them to a different part of the asset sheet.
Mm-hmm.
Still there. They're still worth something. We're just seeing it as an income now. So that's all it is. It's a movement on the balance sheet to something slightly different. So we've taken a visible asset and we bought an invisible one. Getting that language seems to be one of the things that people really understand is, oh, I already had some invisible assets I wasn't paying attention to. They're worth more than I thought they were. So then when we go to actually buy one, they realize we're just moving it to a different asset class. That seems to be one of the things that I find people really resonate with. And then you can still state them on a net worth statement, right? You can say, oh, your annuity still has an expected value of X, right?
That makes sense.
It can
Yeah.
still be stated. It doesn't need to disappear from the net worth statement. They won't get a statement that says it's worth X, But we as planners can work that through and help them still visualize that it does still have a value.
So you've identified how you get over the first hurdle, which is the initial check writing. What about the other end of the hurdle, which is the estate planning? So
Mm,
one of the key challenges is, as you mentioned earlier, we see our net worth, at least in our investment account, decrease from 2.5 million to 1 million, for example, which is then an irrevocable decision to not pass on that 1.5 million to their heirs. So
mm.
how do you approach that conversation? How does that factor into that plan?
Yeah, so that's a great can of worms to open. So because I think I think as I've learned, one of the things that when we when we call or line annuities up as the same thing as a defined benefit pension is like buy a pension, right? Annuities are very different than a pension. What most people know about a pension, like if you think about what people understand about the Ontario Teachers Pension Plan, right? Is if you die, nothing goes to your kids. People understand that. So when you call an annuity a pension, that limited knowledge about a pension is now transferred to the annuity. And they don't realize that you can actually customize an annuity in a way that you can't a pension, right? So we can get in and you can design an annuity to solve some of the fears that people have about dying too soon. You can put those guarantees that you brought up, which is one of the best parts about buying your own pension in a way, is you get to customize it. You get to say, we actually have kids. We are concerned that if we do this and we die tomorrow, our kids won't get anything. So in a lot of cases, with a lot of with the carriers, is you can go up to age 90 for most. Some of them do 95, where you can put a guarantee as long as that age, where if you die before it, any remaining payments will continue until whatever guarantee you set. So great example, you get a couple who's 65, they want to buy an annuity and they say, okay, let's put a 20-year guarantee. That means if they die at 75 with 10 years of remaining payments still to come, those 10 years of remaining payments will still go to their kids. So the whole thing isn't lost just because they die. And those things can be customized. But the other argument I would say that I think is more important goes back to the original one of solving the risk of brevity, right? Is that if we actually have the confidence to spend more and we invest more and we take on a bit more risk, we grow our assets with a little bit more confidence, there's actually a lot more wiggle room for people to then do stuff with their kids while they're still here, right? So I love the concern when people come in saying, well, this might take something from my kids. Well, we can solve that with a guarantee, but look at what it will also give you when you have the confidence to actually do stuff with them, help them buy their homes. Like you'll create a much deeper impact than whatever some of this money might actually do if you leave it behind decades and decades and decades from now. And that's where people start to really flip on that is realize we can actually do that more easily. And when you separated your guaranteed income from the amount you can actually spend, then it gives them a little bit more control. And I would actually say what it does really, it really opens up their confidence to dream a little bigger. And I'll give you a good example. So you probably do a lot of cash flow analysis too with clients, right? And you build and
Yeah.
you go, okay, here's our needs, here's our wants, here's our wishes. We line this out. It's always done on an annual basis, right? But when you put those guaranteed income sources in place, and let's use an example of, again, a $2 million client buys $1 million of annuities. Now we know all their needs are always paid for. They got $1 million left, right? Maybe in their cash flow plan, they had said, okay, our wants is going to be $50,000 a year, right? That's our trips, that's our gifts to our kids, that's fun stuff. But when you buy those guaranteed income sources, you've now changed the number. It's no longer spending 50,000 a year. You have $1 million to spend. How do you want to spend that? Right? We still have to think about tax consequences and all those extra planning elements, but the number has changed dramatically for them. And it opens the way they think about spending the remaining of their money because it's not just how do we want to spend 50 grand a year? It's how do you want to spend $1 million? That's a very different question. Even if you ask yourself, if you had $1 million, it's like when you go buy lottery tickets and you're sitting there kind of going, oh, well, what would you do with it? You can actually set that up for a client so they can actually dream like that with their own money. And that's where those inheritance ideas of look at how wonderful this could be turns into look at how wonderful we have it. Let's do it now because the number has changed. And that is where I find when that actually starts to put into play, people really start doing a lot more with their family much sooner and in bigger numbers.
Wow, I love that, Adam, and I love how you've set it up that then they have this known $1 million to help with and gifting. Hopefully, we can then see gifting during the life, which I know you're a big proponent of. I did want to share one funny story as we've talked on the topic of the guarantees. For those who aren't familiar, Adam's described, you've got $1 million. There's many products you can buy. If it's only going to pay for just your life, maybe you're going to get 2,000 a month, whatever the magic number is. As soon as you start adding those guarantees, we call it the bell and whistle, you are going to look at that going down. If they're going to promise to pay you to 90, maybe they're only going to give you 1,900 a month. They'll do the math and you can make the decision. But I did see one retiree who had this option available to them, and they actually went to their kids and they said, look, if you want this guarantee because you don't want me giving up the whole million and you're worried something will happen to me tomorrow, you can pay me the extra $100 and I'll select this option.
That's pretty good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It
So,
was the opposite. It was death insurance rather than life insurance.
Yes. Yeah.
so Adam, how do you deal with the objection of I'm worried that if I have that $1 million, let's just say that's for my wants, but I have a long-term care need at the end of my life, and I don't want to spend down the assets that are there for safeguarding my longevity and my potential health. How do you deal with that objection, or how do you actually position that element into your planning if we're reducing the capital pool down on the needs, or for the needs, I should say?
Yeah, I think that comes down to more sort of the cash flow analysis side. Because one of the things, and I think there's a Globe and Mail thing that would have just popped out recently on this that I made some comments on, is when, at least for people who own their own home, that transference to, say, even a retirement home, which is the more expensive option, still isn't as expensive as people think it is. So when you take the costs of your actual home, the needs that we calculate, right? And you get rid of all of those, and then you take the value of the house plus the income that could be generated from that, in a lot of cases, people moving into retirement homes actually end up saving more money, right? Like, and you can do that analysis in advance to kind of say, okay, let's see what expenses disappear, what new expense we add, and then what new income stream we also have to support it. And in a lot of cases, the math works out better. The only time that I find we really have to dig into the math more and be a little bit more cautious is if when they want to age in place. If they want to age in their own home, I tend to find that is the far more expensive option, in which case, yeah, now we're looking at the assets a little bit different. We're maybe structuring a little bit higher guaranteed income when we're purchasing it. And that's kind of how we work through sort of there's a bit of a process we work through to how to select the right amount of annuity income, but that would be factored into it. And it's all about what we're factoring into that needs side, both immediately and long term.
Right. Yeah. I'm hearing for a lot of clients, and this maybe is just the demographics we work with, most people want to age in place. I'm not hearing a lot of conversation around, yes, I don't mind going to a retirement home or transitioning. There seems to be, and I don't know why this is, this abhorrence to going into some sort of facility, if you want to call it that. And I'm not sure where that comes from, but I find that that is a psychological barrier for a lot of clients to imagine themselves at that stage of life. And so I read this somewhere. There's research that says none of us can imagine ourselves 10 years older than, more than 10 years older than where we are right now. So trying to imagine planning for ourselves 20, 30 years in the future is almost impossible because it's not a body that we currently inhabit. It's not a psychology that we currently inhabit. So the idea of being comfortable with going into a retirement home is harder to achieve when we're just not there yet, and we can't imagine leaving our home. So I'm just curious, in your work, how does that conversation come up, and how do you get over those types of objections? How do you coach your clients that way?
Yeah, I tend to find that first, a lot of people do make the incorrect assumption that aging in place is cheaper. They see the rents of a retirement home and think, oh, that's crazy. I'll never be able to afford that, right? Imagine saying, okay, your rent's going to be $8,000 a month for a retirement home without realizing their house already cost them 3 grand a month, right? They just haven't done the math. So I
Hmm.
find that barrier number one is changing and helping them understand, is that the reason why they're doing it? Because I tend to find that's a fairly common one. The other one is baked into the generational idea that owning real estate is how you build wealth. And most of the baby boomers in particular, a lot of their wealth is in their real estate. And it's always been something that they are quite favorable to keep. And they really struggle with the idea of no longer owning real estate, in which case we're navigating some of those other issues as well, just realizing that to them real estate is the safety net, right? It's safer than
The
everything
golden
else.
ticket.
It's the golden ticket, right? Probably to most people, real estate even feels safer than a guaranteed income stream you can purchase, right? So giving up that safety net, I think, is the other thing that people have a hard time imagining, and that it can actually work out better for them to do it. Um, yeah, there was a Globe and Mail article where we just talked about that actually recently. If you want to track it down, I can help you find it. But
Yeah, I'll
And
link that in the show notes as well.
Adam, I'm curious if you're seeing the same thing there as we discussed with the longevity piece of when you hit sort of a certain age. Because what I find more personal experience is dealing with some of the seniors once they're getting to the 80s or even the 90s. The appeal of a retirement home is growing because, they're not driving, they're not visiting their friends as much because of those constraints. And now I could be in the same apartment building with my friend down the street. I like to refer to it as university dorms without the classes.
Yeah.
But
that
again, you have to get to that age to then see that appeal.
Yeah.
which positioning it like that is a great way of positioning it. But I would also say that movement from home to retirement home is the first time you have to admit that maybe you can't do everything yourself,
Yeah.
right? And I think that's a bit. It's like when retirees have their keys taken away from them, they can no longer drive. That loss of independence is very difficult for anyone to deal with, and I think admitting it is the hardest part.
I would agree.
You're not giving up your independence. You're not moving there because of your health needs. You're moving there because you're going to enjoy more of the social aspect and that side of it. But I agree, completely appreciate that not it's hard to make that connection.
hmm I think we still have a very common confusion that a retirement home is like a nursing home, and I think a constant perceptional battle that retirees face, that retirement homes are not like nursing homes at all. They're kind of where the party happens
Yeah.
Yeah.
before you go into the nursing home.
Yeah.
Yeah.
My
And bringing back to
grandfather's 103 and he's in a retirement home, not a nursing home. He's lives independently in his own apartment there. Yes, he goes into the kitchen and they make him food. He doesn't want to make food anyway. He's fine with that, but he still has his independence. And to your point, losing that independence is a really big challenge. So even convincing him to leave his house and to sell his house was a challenge because he didn't need to. It wasn't that he was requiring this support from losing his faculties standpoint. It was social, 100% social driven. One other story, just really quickly, is we had a client, and this going back to the annuity conversation, so I want to draw back there. And he and his wife were going into a retirement home. They had made that decision. And at that point, they actually came to us and said, we want to buy an annuity. It was totally driven by them because they wanted to make sure the cost of the retirement home was paid for each month and that they didn't have that worry or that burden any longer. So I thought, you know what, that's a great approach. Like you said, Adam, if you're downsizing your home and you have this infusion of capital, how do then we take that worry and that stress level down even more at that phase or that transition? So I love that.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I was thinking the exact same in terms of structuring your annuity, doing exactly what you've said and make sure how we can make that monthly payment match in with the annuity piece to your rent for the home.
I would say it's also probably underscores one of the most underrated benefits of guaranteed income sources. When you get to older stages of life, as dementia sets in, as power of attorneys take over, Maybe your advisor changes to someone new who you don't know, doesn't know you. One of the things that I find guaranteed income sources do is they protect you from everyone else, including the scammers, the bad decision making that can happen as we get older, even if that is our preferred representative coming in perhaps with a different investment philosophy than you've managed your money. Um, that guaranteed income sources cannot be mismanaged, stolen, misused. They can take maybe what's in your bank account, but at least if someone ever catches that, then the payments, at least from your annuities, your guaranteed income sources, still continue. So, what I like for a lot of people is it's one of the foolproof ways to set up later stage planning so that as you start to struggle to manage your money, or perhaps it's your spouse managing the money and they weren't the money managers, that they're protected from everyone, including themselves, is I think one of the biggest benefits in those later stages. Even as people talk about, like, I don't want to be a burden on my kids. Annuities make sure you'll never actually have to be that burden. You can structure the income so that you'll never actually get to a point where your kids have to pay for it if you do enough planning in advance.
Yeah, it goes back to that simplicity thing we talked about before and just making it easy and less management. Talk to the audience maybe a little bit because you mentioned, okay, we're taking that risk element down. What protections are there in place for annuity holders should something happen to the insurance company that issued the annuity?
So that falls on Assura's shoulders. It's kind of similar to CDIC insurance with the bank, but it's basically something that all insurance companies ascribe to, and it guarantees income payments up to the greater of, I think the limit's now $5,000 a month or 90%, whichever is greater. But that is per person, per insurance company, right? So if you have a couple who have each used maybe their own RSPs to buy, they're separately insured up to that limit individually. So even if you are seeking amounts above that limit, you can actually just go to different insurance companies and buy more through
Spread
them.
it out.
And you can spread it out just like you would a GIC or anything else. You can do the same thing with annuities to make sure that you've spread your risk between different companies to get that insurance protection, which
Where is it more favorable in your practice? Do you see people buying annuities? Is it in non-registered accounts or with non-registered assets? Is it with RIFs instead of because you have to have a RIF income stream? Tell me, kind of what you're seeing and maybe that bleeds into the types of annuities conversation.
well, I mean, the first one I always love to use for annuities if we're going to buy one, if someone has a LIF or a LIRA, we use that first because they're a pain in the butt, right?
Yeah.
Maximums. If we're going to buy an annuity, let's use those first. But I think when we're designing the annuities and building these guarantees, right, it really comes down to the kind of accounts that people already have and what we can use. So when we're talking about different types of annuities, it's actually more dependent on the source of the money. That's what determines what kind of annuity you can buy. So not all annuity types are available to every potential retiree. But if we run through some of the potential options for people, it changes the way you can plan income. It changes income splitting, you name it. So we can take a few minutes and just run through a couple of them here. But like, let's start with non-registered because Andrew, you already brought this one up, right?
Okay.
So that client that wants to come in, $2 million non-registered. She had it invested in GICs. It's a great example of one of the best benefits of a non-registered annuity is that you can buy what's called a prescribed annuity. And that is one that comes with some extra tax benefits. So it's for non registered money only. But what it allows you to do, so take your example of your retiree with $2 million. She's got it all invested in GICs, which means she's earning interest income only. And every dollar of interest she makes, she has to pay taxes on in the year she earned it. Prescribed annuities, what they do is they take that taxation that would typically sit very heavy at the front end and slowly diminish as you use your assets down, very similar to a mortgage, right? It's very interest heavy at the beginning. And then as you pay the mortgage down, the interest goes down, right? What a prescribed annuity does is it takes all that interest and it levels it out through the entirety of the annuity. So you can actually end up in the earlier years with a much higher take home pay with a lot less income to report. So as you're structuring income, I think one of the coolest thing retirees have is they actually have some control over what they show CRA. When we're working, it's just whatever you get paid, you have to show them and report. But in retirement, depending on the different accounts they have some control over what they show versus what they don't. And so annuities from a non-registered portfolio adds an extra little tax planning element that as you're sitting there going, okay, someone maybe who retired earlier doesn't have the age 65 tax credit. We haven't bumped into all these other things that help reduce their tax rates. Maybe if we're looking at annuities, we're looking at using part of their non-registered account to help create cash flow without creating income.
Which could help with things like OAS clawback, for example, preserving more other income sources that they could be eligible for.
Yeah. So those can be super helpful for that. Then you get into your pension sources. So these are your defined benefit pension. Yes, you can do annuities through defined benefit pensions and your defined contribution pension plans. So let's look at the defined benefit pension, because I think this is one of the neater ones that what a lot of people don't realize is when you get that giant stack of paperwork just before you retire and it's got all these options on it, it's got all these things you can do, right? Emotions are really high. What a lot of people don't realize is in between the options of taking your pension, taking the commuted value, or whatever kind of other options, usually sitting right at the bottom, there's sometimes an extra checkbox that says buy an annuity. And that's about all it says. But on a defined benefit pension, that buy annuity option actually does a lot more than what people think. So that is for a copycat annuity. And what that is, that allows you to basically go out to the market and look at other insurance companies and say, can we buy the exact same income stream my company's offering, but possibly for less? And it's really cool because if you can do it, and a great example is I just did this with a CAMI retiree just a little while ago, is we took his CAMI pension, we shopped it around, and we actually found an insurance company could do the same exact pension with bridge benefits. Everything was exactly the same, but they could do it for $39,000 less than what the employer was willing to do it for. So what we did is we were able to check that buy an annuity option on his pension paperwork, shift it over, and he bought his defined benefit pension plan through an insurance company with an annuity, and he got to keep that $39,000 difference. So just by shopping it around, if there's actually a gain to be made, the pensioner actually gets to keep that difference. Okay. But even if there isn't a huge gain to be had, I would still say to a lot of people, if that option exists, you should go shopping anyways. Because even if there's no gain to be had, it goes back to that assures protection, right? Is that idea of moving it out. Now you have actually a guarantee backing your pension as opposed to the Sears Canada issues and all those financial issues that sometimes impact pensions when companies go under or they're underfunded. By moving your pension out and doing a copycat annuity, you can actually remove yourself from whatever future issues your company may or may not have that may affect your pension. And when we're talking retirement of, for some people, 30, 35 years, sometimes 40 years, do you know what the financial stability of your company is going to be 40 years from now? So
And even if
shifting.
you do, I mean, even if you think you do, you don't know
Mhm.
what could happen. I mean, going back to my grandfather, because he's the telltale of everything, he was a Nortel pensioner. I
Yeah.
mean, nobody could have foretold what was going to happen to Nortel, and he had his pension cut substantially. And it just goes to show, especially if you get only one pension from a single employer, there is still a lot of risk in that element, even though it feels guaranteed. There is that risk element that persists. And how well funded is that pension plan? How well are they able to meet their actuarial obligations? Jennifer can talk about this, I'm sure, over time. Have you seen that, Jennifer, in your travels at all?
Well, what I was going to say is I do just want to caveat as the pension beside, but there is a pension guaranteed fund as well. So I don't want people hearing this thinking, oh, okay, my DB pension. So there is, similar to the Assures, that saying, I think the limits are lower. I don't have the limits off the top of my head, but there is something to be said about shifting away. But I don't want somebody listening to this thinking there's no guarantee on my DB pension. I was wondering, Adam, though, in the case that you've described of being able to take the pension, the option, In that case, we're doing the copycat annuity. So you have to get the exact same, right? We
Yes.
don't have the option with that one to go and do what we discussed of customize the build your own, get the guaranteed to 90,
Correct.
unless, and tell me if I'm wrong, we're taking the commuted value into the lira and buying the annuity within the lira.
Yeah, then you get back to you can add whatever you want. In a copycat scenario, the copycat can be different. It just can't result in a material benefit to the pensioner. Otherwise, CRA has an issue with it. So in my CAMI example, there was actually one clause that is very you don't often see in pensions, but he was the pensioner, his spouse had the survivor benefits, all those kind of things that are typical. But they had a clause that said if she predeceased him, he would actually get a little pension bump on his. That was something we couldn't actually replicate for him with the annuity system, but it was a few bucks a month. So it was actually a material loss for him in what he had on his pension. So in that case, it was fine. So there can still be differences. It just can't be something that benefits the pensioner. So we can make a copycat worse, but we can't make it better.
And would be adding that guarantee to 90, would that be considered better or worse from the
It would be worse.
regulator's
It
perspective?
would be better for the pensioner because
Okay.
now they have a guarantee that didn't
Yeah.
exist, right? But in that case, we took away a benefit that if she passed away, he would get a little bit more money. That does not exist in his copycat. But at this point, it was a very weird, interesting case just in how to layer it together. And that's one of the issues I think with copycats is you have to be very particular how you structure them, that it does actually match the pension as closely as possible. And even when you send the instructions to the insurance companies to say, hey, we're doing a copycat. We want to replicate this. Here's the commuted value and the options. It's amazing how many times the insurance companies send you the wrong information, right? In one case, they sent us a quote that didn't include any of the bridge benefits at all. So it made it look like the pensioner could keep $100,000 instead. And we had to go back and say, that's a material difference. CRA would have a problem with that. So there is an element in there that I do say that you need to work with someone who's worked on some copycats in the past to be able to make sure it's structured properly because it does make a difference in CRA's eyes.
For the audience, they would still be able to do the buy your own annuity option with their DB pension by taking the commuted value.
Yeah,
It's just a multiple step process.
and you lose some of the features, right? Income splitting. As soon as you do that, you lose the income splitting option. That rollout to the lira and then purchasing with the lira means we now have to wait until 65 for splitting. So, I mean, it's not to say we can't layer things and do things different, but it does remove a few features. But it's also actually one of the interesting things about the defined contribution pension plans, and this is one of the things I really wanted to dig into, is because unlike the copycat with the DB benefits where you have to buy a copycat, defined contribution pension plans, we don't have to copy anything, which means we can do a lot more with it and we can preserve the income splitting because a rollout from a DC to an annuity means it's still left a pension plan and is rolled into something that still qualifies as something that can receive income splitting. But here's the really neat thing. Unlike your defined benefit pension plan, where you have to roll the whole thing to get that, on a DC, you don't. We can actually pick and choose and say, we only want so much of this to go to the annuity. We want the remainder to go to a lira. And you can separate and more custom design how you want that to work and maintain all of those income splitting options and pension tax credits and all the things that come from being able to do that in a defined contribution pension plan.
That was going to be my next question. So I'm glad you brought that up. And just for the audience who may not be familiar with income splitting, you mentioned lift income splitting at 65. So maybe just if you could clarify for everyone what annuities are eligible for in terms of income splitting.
Yeah, so the annuities that are eligible is based on the source of where the money comes from. So pre-65, it has to come from a pension source, directly from a DB or DC pension plan. Now you can split back and forth pre-65. After 65, you can do it with your RSPs, your lifts, your whatever. It's just in that pre-65 zone, which comes into more of a an income planning element and a tactical structure than anything. It's okay, anyone who's retiring before 65, where are your assets sitting? Do we have a way of manually income splitting between RSP and RIF withdrawals with some kind of other pension stuff? Or do we actually want actual income splitting? Because at least from that age 65 under, even on the spouse's side, if the spouse doesn't have any pension assets, then getting at least some pension income and splitting gets us the pension tax credit earlier. Those kind of things can make a small but meaningful difference when you're potentially retiring at 55 and you get 10 years of extra splitting, extra stuff, and you get the annuities right up front. So kind of in the hierarchy there, like if I were designing retirement income and we're going, okay, what source do we use first? If we're doing an earlier retirement for someone, chances are we're looking at their defined benefit pension, their DC pension plan, working with some of those to provide the first layer, then adding in some of their other accounts to add extra layers if needed. If the pension money isn't enough to buy the guaranteed income we want, then you start moving through other accounts, typically leaving RSPs, non-registered, all those kind of things to the end. I try to get rid of the complicated accounts first, liras and lifts falling into those zones just because of their heavy restrictions.
So clearly it's individually dependent as to what makes sense. Retirement income planning is so personal. It's not, there's no one size fits all solution, which I think you've just exemplified there in all of this. So working with someone like yourself who has deep understanding of how to layer, of what to look for, of understanding a client's needs and wants and cash flow, understanding longevity, understanding all of those elements that we've talked about today and how they fit together, I think is so crucial. So what would be sort of a final message that you would give to somebody who was considering an annuity and wasn't sure where to start? What's a good starting point for someone who is interested but doesn't know where to go from this podcast?
It's a really great question. There's obviously a lot of information out on the internet, but I would say again, I think a lot of it still kind of positions everything as longevity products, and annuities solve so many other issues that I think it takes talking to planners and advisors who actually support annuities, have some kind of background in it, so that as you have questions or if you think you want your mind changed about annuities, talk to someone who actually is using them for the right reasons. Um, like even when we work with annuities for a lot of our clients, is we even do them commission free. Like we don't even take a commission on the annuities for our clients where we're producing an income because it means they get a higher payout, right? Believe it or not, annuities are one of the few products in insurance you can actually do without commissions. In fact, it might be one of the only ones,
Mm-hmm.
GIO being the only other one. But it means there's a lot of flexibility out there in the annuity realm for people who want good access to information. Um, and I think the toughest thing is actually getting a plan first that helps you figure out what's the right amount annuity to buy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the industry has sort of taken a bit of if you look at if you go looking for annuities and you look at quotes, right, you're going to find a bunch that'll show, look at how much payment you'll get for 100,000. That doesn't help you answer the question of how much annuity you need. You have to work it the other way. It's how much income do we need in our particular retirement income stream to satisfy the guaranteed income sources to make sure we can't run out of money, right? Then you go buy the amount of annuity you need. It's not the other way around. It's not, I have $500,000 I'm going to go buy annuity with. How much will that get me? Let's custom fit it. Let's make sure you're not buying too much or too little of the thing that is meant to solve a very specific and important problem. So
And that all comes down to cash flow at the end of the day.
cash flow, yeah. And working through, and when we model all the taxation within a plan too, like those elements really factor into calculating those guaranteed income sources. So I think probably the best source, yeah, poke around on the internet, but the best source is going to be talking to a planner who actually builds retirement income and can actually talk to actually how you would actually add an annuity into your income sources and how much you actually need. That is not just some random number picked off a wall, right? It should be specific to you. It should say, you need $38,423 a year of annuity income, and it should be explainable,
And so
right?
to that, where can people find you? Because you're a wonderful resource, a wonderful planner. And if I was hiring anyone to do annuity planning, it would be you. So where can people find you? Where can they reach out to you?
Yeah. So yesmoney.ca is where we do a lot of our work. We do some fee for service planning so people can engage us for a one-off plan. But we also have done a lot of work in the last little bit supporting advice only planners who are helping their clients do an annuity, that if they work with someone like you first and you do the plan and say they need X amount of annuity, we will actually help them put the annuity in place without needing to do all the extra work through us to build the plan and everything. So we've been doing that with a lot of people actually for the last 3 or 4 years now. Because annuities, at least once we get them going, are relatively simple. They're not a high service element product. It's the planning work that's heavy.
Hmm.
So I think it's going to become a lot more common to work with advice only planners on annuities and retirement income. And then you'll use someone like me to implement them.
Yes, I will.
Yeah. I I
Yes,
think
we
one of the best options that are out there these days is with advice only, is they can come in, pay for a plan. If it's incorporated in, then they can also just go get the annuity. But it's nice for us, at least as planners, because I would never just have someone come off the street, say, I want an annuity. I'm not going to do that, because there actually is starting to be a little bit extra regulation in the insurance world. And I would never just help someone buy an annuity for buying an annuity's sake. The
yeah.
plan has to be done first. So we know exactly how much annuity to buy, what source it's coming from, how it affects things. All of those things need to be known in advance. So for me, it starts with a planner of any sort to help you figure out where an annuity fits.
And just a plug for all products out there, products should always follow a plan. It doesn't matter if it's an annuity, a fund, an insurance policy, whatever it is, a product is the last piece of the puzzle. The planning element should always come first. So just a PSA out there for everyone, just to know the product is like, for me, if you're building a house, you need the blueprint before you know what nail you're going to use to put the floorboards in. Like you need that blueprint. We're all planners here. We all agree with that concept, I'm
Right.
sure.
Yeah.
But I just want to say thank you, Adam, for your time today. It's been really fun. And I know that we could keep talking for much longer about annuities. Like we could keep going and going. We can do
Yeah.
round 2 if you want. And Jennifer, thank you so much for all of your wisdom and your 2 cents and being my co-host today. So really appreciate your time. And again, if you want to find Adam, please go to yesmoney.ca. Look him up. He's fantastic. You can also find him on LinkedIn. He's in the media all over the place. Lots of plugs I can do for Adam. But look up Adam Chapman anywhere on your Google device, and he will come up in many different places. So once again, thank you so much and have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andrea. Thanks, Jennifer.